everyone and welcome to my channel. In this video I want to show you the process on how to create a Terminator for my custom Space Marine chapter. So without further ado, get started. I started off with this regular Terminator's body and sanded off the emblem to better fit the look of my custom chapter. I then grabbed this tarbot from the SWAT Brethren kit and chopped off everything I didn't need to make it fit to the body. I then used a piece from the old Deathwing kit, cut off the upper belt part and placed it over the transition. Also adding a few extra backs and scrotes to cover up some rough spots. For the arms, I went with the classic power fist on the left, and on the right I took this mace from the new Deathwing Knights. I then cut and shaped two capes from the SWAT Brethren kit and placed them around the legs. I'm a really big fan of some kind of war skirt aesthetic, and in this case I think it really enhances the mini's imposing presence. I also added some 3D printed candles on his back. Absolutely essential, so he won't get lost on the battlefield. Now it was time for the helmet. Since my custom chapter is all about salads on Space Marines, I choose a 3D printed one which encapsulates this aesthetic while also looking quite tanky. While pushing it in, I just wasn't able to align it with the left arm the way I wanted it to be, so I took it away again to cut off a bit of the bottom part and hoping not to mess up the whole bit with this move. After luckily being successful, the angle was now in the position I wanted it to be. To finish the build, I hit the arm to torso transition with a purity seal, which I've previously bent a bit to make it fit even better. So now to the base. Here I simply used some cork chunks and arranged them to give our little space soldier a solid footing. After that I used this Vallejo texture paste to cover the ground. Also adding a bit of stonework, which I attached by using scenic glue. That's a bit of PVA glue mixed with water and a tiny drop of dish soap to break the surface tension. Next up, the painting. Here I started with the black base coat. Once that was dry, I grabbed my hobby knife and started to add some scratches to the surface. I also kind of carved in some deep scratches and little holes in the armor. Looked cool at first, but halfway through I wasn't so sure if this was such a great idea. But hey, what better occasion to try out new things than a showcase video? After painting it black again, I then used some natural steel and applied it very sloppy with this kind of dry brushing motion over the whole armor till most of it was covered. It's kinda messy, but this way it creates this gritty base layer. I also added some Spartan bronze to the natural steel and applied the mix to some selected areas. After the metallics came the dirt. Here I used liquid pigments and mixed black soot with a bit of dark earth. I then covered the whole armor with the resulting wash, and since I wanted to make it extra dark, I also added a second layer of the mix. After that has dried, I came back in with the metallics to re-establish the edges and some surface centers. Doing a bit of back and forth with the dulling down and highlighting of certain areas and fixing tiny spots till I was happy with it. Next up, the leather parts. I kept it pretty simple here. Base coated the backs with different browns and then roughly dabbed on a lighter diluted tone of the same color. After dried, I darkened everything with diluted black paint and then simply re-established some texture on the edges. The war skirt was done even quicker. One base layer of Duras brown mixed with a little bit of black. And then, while it was still wet, I added some leather brown and a quick highlight with a mix of leather brown and basic skin tone. So quite messy, but super simple and quick. Especially since the skirt will be covered in dry pigments and OSL anyways, I saw no need to be neat here. For the little shield piece and upper armor, I used Vallejo basic skin tone, applying several thin coats to get a decent coverage. Then I painted the tiny shield with Caliban green, also using multiple layers. Messing up a bit on the run, but no big deal, since I can simply come back with the other color and fix the error. Once that was done, I used the sponge to add battle damage. Lots of gentle dabbing with diluted black paint. Also a little bit of brushwork to refine things. The next step, I used some good old Nuln Oil to cover all the previously painted areas. Then another pigment wash with black soot and dark earth, focusing on pulling the pigments toward the edges and cleaning up the centers a bit. I guess the proper way would be to use a brush, but it seems like I'm kinda uncivilized. To add some highlights, I then went back in with some basic skin tone. Mostly aiming for the edges of the sponge battle damage, but in some spots I ended up creating entirely new patterns with a brighter color. Just trying to keep things loose and spontaneous. I also added some shades of brown to create a bit of variation, which was also something I came up with on the run and which also does not look too great. So here are definitely some weird spots when you zoom in, but as a whole I think it still kinda works. Now it was time for the candles. Base coat with basic skin tone, then a dab of white for the flames, followed by some Nuln Oil. Normally I would use an airbrush here, but I wanted to show you that you can also do this without one. I covered all the candles with diluted flame orange and then added less diluted paint on the flame itself. They were then tackled with some yellow flame, followed by toxic yellow. And to finish it up, I also added some OSL white on top to make the flames pop even more. And with the candles flickering, it was now time for the maze. Here I again used some OSL white from Green Stuff World. Started to cover the recesses of the weapon while not really caring about being neat, since the following steps will cover up the initial messiness. I then added a layer of diluted flame orange to the recesses, followed by a thin line of toxic yellow. After that, I finished the glow with a layer of a diluted mix of orange flame and sun yellow. Just covering the whole area with it and letting the previously applied paint shine through. And to tone it down and to unify the surface, I then gently applied black and dark red pigments over the area. And after a few runs with the dry pigments, I called the maze done. Since I wanted to add some light reflections later on, I now needed to paint the base first. Here I again used Cura's brown. I added leather brown to the edges while it was still wet, then went in with diluted black paint and then again fleshed out some of the edges with the leather brown and skin tone mix. For the finishing touch I used some dry pigments with earth tone colors. Also brushed some onto the boots and the tabard to blend it all together. And after that it was time for the flame effect. Here I started with some Halloween spider web. I pulled off a chunk, shaped it a bit and glued it onto the mini with PVA glue. I then cut off some excess material, glued it again and trimmed it more till I came up with this flame-like shape. Alright, I really tried to keep airbrush use to a minimum, but for the overall light reflections I'm just not capable to do it that smooth without it. So I sprayed some orange flame on the flame. That's easily doable with a brush. But then I also airbrushed the glow onto the body around the area where I assume the light would hit. And that's one of those areas where I think brushwork just can't compete with the softness of airbrush blending. Back at the painting desk, I then added a flame orange and sun yellow mix to the edges which are directed to the flame. Doing the same for the rocks on the base which are on the light facing side. I then finished off the flame with some sun yellow followed by a layer of toxic yellow, applying thin diluted layers and trying to blend the colors into each other. The key here was to keep the lower part almost white and then create a transition from white to yellow to orange and then to red on the top. As a last step, a few more glow reflections on the chest, belt and knee pad using some thin layers of pretty diluted orange-yellow mix. And after covering some flaws, I called the mini done. Alright, time for a little reflection. To be honest, the painting process here was a bit flawed. I was actually super stoked about the whole conversion and the pose, but painting wise there were quite a few things that initially didn't work out too well. For example, the battle damage on the dark armor parts didn't look the way I had imagined it. In fact, what you see in the later video is actually the second version. While it kind of worked for the painting close-ups in the beginning, the complete view on it just did not feel right. So on the second attempt, I dialed down the metallics on the lower half even more and brightened things up around the head, adding much brighter scratches there and making it even more of a focal point. And there were other areas that didn't go too smooth either, like the helmet or the whole heat glow effect on the back, that you didn't see at all so far. Originally, I wanted to do it without an airbrush, kinda messed it up and then quietly redid it off camera. Basically just painting it white and then spraying a thin coat of flame orange on top of it. But instead of going into detail about every single issue, I just want to use this as a reminder. What you see online is often the polished version, and the one where the fade steps are already hidden. But truth is, we all mess up from time to time, and we all have different sets of experience, different time frames, and different ways of working. So when it comes to comparing our work, yesterday's self is the only fair benchmark, not someone else's final shot. Also, I think it's good to acknowledge both our strengths and our weak points. For example, you may have noticed that I'm not a particularly neat painter. And while improvement also means stepping out of our comfort zones and challenging ourselves from time to time, I don't think it should feel like we are fighting against our own attributes. Instead of working against, I think sometimes it's better to lean into them, to adopt techniques and styles that actually benefit from who we are. For me, that meant embracing a slightly chaotic and sometimes messy workflow. Growing into that really makes painting so much more fun to me. And I mean, in the end, isn't that what it's all about? Having fun in the hobby and enjoying the process. For this mini, even though the process was a bit rough and it's not my best paint job, I still find it kinda cool. The OSL and the battle damage works, I think, and I just like the overall vibe. So thanks for sticking around till the end. I hope you enjoyed the video and maybe found something useful for your own hobby journey. And while we're at it, thank you so much for all your nice comments on my last video. I wasn't able to answer all of them, but please know that I read and appreciate every single one. So again, thank you and hopefully seeing you next time. Take care.